I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we are talking about a thrilling thriller that you will not want to put down. It is the story of two powerful women. One is a poor little rich girl who has been wronged one too many times, and the other is a savvy FBI agent who has met her match in Larissa La Roche. The name of the book is Once is Never Enough. Revenge Never Sleeps, and it is written by Dr. Monique Liozzi, and we are delighted to have her here today on Spotlight, and we thank our friends, the team at Sweet Spire Literature Management, for helping us put Monique in the spotlight today. Monique, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Logan. It's a great pleasure. It's awesome.
The pleasure is all mine. Love your book. Like I said, it's a thrilling thriller. It's very original. It's one powerful woman pitted against another powerful woman, and you rarely see that in either film, TV, or literature. Tell me, or tell the audience rather, what your book is about in a little synopsis.
So essentially, I'll start by saying why I came to actually write this particular book, which I actually really enjoyed writing. It's it came about because a lot of my people who've read my previous books have said, especially the first one, Foresight and Hunted, where the main sort of female cop or FBI protagonist features. Um, a lot of people enjoyed her character, and they enjoyed her character because she's very dynamic and she has a bit of a psychic ability. And so after I finished Foresight and Hunted, I went on to write some other things. And people kept on saying, when's the next one coming with Isabella Ashford? I'm like, well, soon, soon. Anyway, the question kept coming, and I figured I better write something, otherwise I'll be in big trouble with everyone. So I thought of what can I convey that's different that I haven't done before, and but that's still action packed and tells a good narrative. So I thought a little bit about my own career as in aviation as a commercial pilot and a flight instructor. And I thought that wouldn't be a bad idea to have something related to aviation, but I didn't want anything that involved, air sort of disasters. And I certainly couldn't bring myself to, as a pilot, to have a pilot psychopath. So I figured, who else next? So I thought of having a female protagonist, which I've never written about before, female serial killer, um, as a flight attendant. So this is a story about. It's a little bit like the Black Widow meets the talented Mr. Ripley. So it's a story about a young girl who is comes from a very wealthy background, lives in Napa Valley with her family, who own this, wine company. And as a young child, she witnesses her greedy uncle murdering her mother. So she's traumatized by this, and she's had to face him in court. And the wicked uncle gets, put away. Anyway, as life goes on, she gets taken in by her grandfather and the rest of the family. She and her brother, do very well, and she sets her mind to leaving, Napa Valley as soon as she can, and flying around the world. And she's always wanted to be a flight hostess, and she does it really well.
Mm.
During one of her tour of duties, trauma and disaster strikes again, and this ignites the her concept of, the world is a dangerous place. You can't really trust anyone, and it fuels the dormant anger that she had towards her uncle, who basically had killed her mother and someone else that I won't say, so you can read the book and find out. Anyway, without telling too much or conveying too much, she basically decides that following this tragedy that she witnesses, she basically miscarries her first child. So she's now married and she miscarries. So there's additional trauma, fueling this anger. And she decides to take revenge. And she's a bit of a chameleon as well, a great flight hostess with a great track record. No one suspects her. She flies around, various states in the United States mainly. And all these dead people, sort of all businessmen, cheating businessmen, married businessmen, end up dead in these, nice hotel suites. And so FBI agent Ashford and her colleagues, they start seeing a pattern of these mysterious deaths. And they start to follow a trail. And Isabella Ashford basically is the FBI agent. Larissa La Roche is the main female protagonist. Um, so Isabella basically uses a little bit of her insight and foresight and psychic ability to, through her dreams, to try and navigate what exactly is happening and how all these cases basically are linked. And so the story goes from there, and it evolves, and it becomes a bit of a cat and mouse chase across the United States, but then also into Europe, into Switzerland, where Larissa changes identity and escapes, tries to evade capture. So it's quite dynamic. And what I really like doing is taking the audience on a nice, tour around the world. I sort of start usually my books in one location, and we sort of navigate around, maybe other parts of the world, because I like to travel. So that makes sense for me. So that's kind of what it's about. And I won't say any more because
Well, you don't need to say anymore. You've said a lot. You've set it up. It is quite a story. And a little background for the audience now. Dr. Monique Liozzi is a psychiatrist. So she is able to delve into the brain of a killer very, very well. And I think that's what I like so much about your book, Doctor, is that you can tell it was written by an intelligent person. It's multi-layered. It is very, the prose is just very fluid as well. But the understanding of the criminal mind and the past trauma that might be involved. Tell me a little bit about how your work as a writer intersects with your work as a shrink.
First of all, call me Monique. Don't call me doctor.
Okay. When you got your author hat on, we'll call you Monique.
I do.
Okay.
A lot of my patients call me Monique anyway, so it's all good. So I do like to explore, my knowledge in psychiatry, and when I create a character, especially the villain, I always sort of think, what sort of characteristics, personality characteristics would they have, and how would they have been shaped from childhood? And not only that, from that, then I start to try and think about, what crime is this person going to commit? Are they going to be quite covert, or are they going to be, quite, how do you say, chaotic
Stealth.
And dynamic, and yeah. And from there, then I start thinking about, now, what am I going to call them? So none of my books are related to any of my patients or anyone I've met. So that's, I'm going to say that up front.
Right.
And oftentimes I think about the person's characteristics, and what, by free association, for me, what names come to mind. So I help write a whole list of names, and then literally over a few days, I decide which ones to eliminate, and I'm left with one. So that does intersect. I do enjoy using, my knowledge of the mind, but also I'm very interested in forensic sciences. So I did do some training as a pathologist when I was much younger, before I ventured into psychiatry, and forensic pathology was always a huge interest for me. And so I've kept that interest, and obviously used my knowledge and bit of research in forensic sciences to create, the crime scenes and the rest that goes with it.
And the method of killing, I won't get into it, but the method of killing is very intelligent also, because I love seeing strong women in thrillers, whether it's a movie or in a book, but I sometimes can't buy the fact that she's going fist to fist with a guy who's 6'5" and 230 pounds. But I do understand a woman who is a little bit conniving, a little bit secretive, has a knowledge of different aspects of science, and uses that knowledge as a murder weapon.
Yeah, indeed. Yes. There's a series on Netflix called Dangerous Women. I don't know if you watched it, and it sort of gave me some ideas as well. So
now, you address this in the book. One of the reasons why they discount Larissa as a possible suspect at first is that they find it hard to believe that the serial killer is a woman. It is true that fewer serial killers are women. Talk to the audience a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit about why women are less likely to kill. Are they less likely to be psychopathic? Is it just a matter of testosterone? What's your take on it,
Well,
Monique?
Monique, it's a mix of things. There is obviously the psychodynamics that um, in, that basically has a huge role to play, especially in a child's developmental trajectory. So the ability of a child to learn in very early infancy to trust is a huge kind of a factor. And also from there, what living environment they're living in, is it a warm and loving environment? What are the perceptions? How do the main caregivers model the way they see the world and impart that onto a youngster? So there's that psychodynamic thing. There is also, the aspect of hormones. And again, I mean, I think in my experience, I mean, I'm not a forensic psychiatrist, but women are probably just as likely to kill uh, than, if you compare them to men. Probably the motivation is different. I think the motivation for women is more, in relation to love and jealousy, um, sometimes money, but and women tend to kill using less violent means, usually, not always. So there's no formula, but that's a sort of general sort of trend from what I understand and what I've read about female serial killers. They are better liars than men, though. So they appear to be more cunning. So yeah.
Yeah.
And IQ is also important, the person's IQ. People sort of talk about, is someone a psychopath or are they a sociopath? What's the difference? Well, the difference is IQ and how organized are they in the deed and how well do they cover their tracks.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I investigated a potential serial killer up in Rhode Island. He actually murdered an entire family with a crossbow. His name was
Mm.
Christopher Hightower. And I worked very closely with the detectives on the case. And they said it's likely he left a trail of dead bodies wherever he went because he was utilitarian in his killing. He killed for a purpose. In the case of killing the family, he wanted to get money. But one of the detectives said to me, and it always stuck with me, is if I have a problem with a person, I might not speak to them. I might write them a nasty letter. I might call their boss. But on the list of things I might do isn't kill them. And that's what kind of separates the psychopath from the normal person
That's
because
correct. Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, Monique.
Well, that's pretty much it's about what your frontal lobes are telling you to do and logic. So the frontal lobes control executive function, and the part of the brain that controls emotion is called the amygdala. And there is evidence, scientific evidence of morphological structural changes compared to if you compare a brain of and the brain function of a psychopath and someone who's normal. Someone who has psychopathic tendencies has basically a much more formatted sort of or heightened level of activity in the amygdala, and the links with the frontal lobes that control impulse or basically are somewhat sort of skewed and damaged. And then there's all the other sort of things with the chemistry of the brain, the noradrenaline, the dopamine, and all that sort of stuff that we won't get into, but
We
it's
won't get
again quite
into it, but it
complex.
is fascinating and it is the mind of a killer. Another fascinating aspect of you, and you alluded to it before, is that you're a pilot. And I think you're flying big jets. It's not necessarily just twin engines. Tell me a little bit about how you started flying and your work as a pilot.
Okay, well, I started flying. I had a bit of a personal setback many moons ago, and my husband at the time said, "Well, what do you want to do that you haven't done before?" And I said, "I wouldn't mind learning how to fly a helicopter." And so he said, "Well, why don't you try fixed wing first?" Because he used to fly as a youngster, and see how you go. So I did. So he books me on this little trial flight in a little Cessna, and I was hooked, and I had such a wonderful time. And so then I thought, well, I might as well fly airplanes because they're a little bit safer and it's also cheaper to do the lessons. And I really enjoyed it. So I did sort of do my multi-engine rating and, slowly worked up to, doing my commercial pilot license. I don't fly big jets, but I have flown, multi sort of twin engines.
Hmm.
Tecnam is one of my favorite aircrafts that I've flown. But mainly as a senior flight instructor, I sort of teach in the single engine little aircrafts, and it affords me a lot of pleasure. I certainly see the world from a different vantage point, pardon the pun. But and you get to know different people. You meet so many different people, and as a psychiatrist, I always have my little psych hat on, and so
Mm.
it's also about managing the students' anxiety and sort of knowing what they're feeling and what they're thinking, and trying to teach them how to fly an airplane while managing maybe some of their worries and their sort of apprehensions about what the aircraft can and can't do. So yeah,
And
so I do fly.
as I said before, your work as a pilot has actually informed your work. That's kind of what inspired Larissa's career choice as a
Yeah,
character.
that's correct. Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Are you thinking of picking up this story? I know it kind of left off not quite complete. Will there be a sequel?
There's a kernel of an idea. So something's brewing, something's in the ether. So usually I have a kernel of an idea. I'll write it down and let it simmer for a little while. And then slowly, I sort of get more ideas and I just jot them down. And then when I'm ready, I start sort of creating a bit of a storyboard.
Mhm.
It's kind of interesting. People ask me, well, do you write every single day? How do you write? How do you do
Mhm.
it? And the answer is no, I don't write every single day. There might be weeks where I don't write anything. And then there's going to be like 3 or 4 days in a row where I might spend 4 or 5 hours, early in the morning, writing. I
Mm.
have to be in the mood. And when I wrote Vestige, which we'll talk about in a few weeks' time, that's a
Mhm.
ghost story. I had to write at night. It had to be dark and creepy and spooky in my old house. So that's when I wrote. So yeah.
Exactly. It's funny, I work with a lot of writers. I do writing myself, and I've, worked with top writers such as yourself. And I believe it's James Patterson who says that the best time of day to write is the morning, because that is the time where you're most likely in a drunken or dreamlike state naturally. Well, that's when your imagination is free. Do you agree with that? You seem to.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love James Patterson. In fact, I have read pretty much all of his books.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I do agree with that because sometimes I actually get ideas through my dreams.
Mm.
So, and I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll have to write it down. And that's exactly right. Sometimes I will write, even if it's for, 45 minutes, I'll just write a portion of a chapter. So that's so true. But as I said earlier, sometimes um, it's important to write if you're writing like a ghost story, to sort of create the scene for yourself. So you sort of just get absorbed in that sort of story and in the ambience that you're creating for yourself. And that's, for me, that also helps generate ideas. But
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, I have had writer's block. So
We all suffer from it from time to time. The Shining is a perfect example of that, right?
yeah.
But I often find playing your favorite music or music of the era where you're writing is also a helpful tool to get you into that mood or that mode. Talk a little bit about this book, Once is Never Enough, as a possible movie, because it's so visual to me as an actor. I could see this made into a film or a TV series quite easily and quite well. Did you have that in your back of your mind at all, or have you thought about it since?
Yeah. I've pretty much, it would be for me a dream come true to have one of my books, at least one of my books, become, adapted into a movie or a miniseries. So this one definitely, and it's because, okay, you sort of alluded that there could be a sequel. It's because of the way, if the way the story is shaped. It's basically written in three sections, as you would have noted. And I think it would be well suited for a movie. Don't ask me who would be casting, but there is, if you look at I'm sure you would have looked at my website, moniquegaleozzi.com.
I
There's
did.
all these trailers. All my books have trailers, movie trailers. They have either a treatment or a screenplay, or in some cases both. So I am sort of basically looking at finding someone who's actually interested in doing a project, an actual movie project, not a trailer of sorts, but
Right.
actually divulge and do a project. A lot of people have said, when's that going to happen for you? When's that going to happen for you? I'm like, well, it'll happen when it's meant to happen.
Right.
When the stars align, that's when it's going to happen. So at the end of the day, that's my absolute passion and my absolute dream, and that would be great. That would be awesome.
If you're going to cast Larissa La Roche, who would play her?
Oh, me. No, just kidding. Well, I actually had thought maybe a Nev Campbell.
I can
Uh,
see that.
yeah,
Or a
yeah, Nev
Jennifer
Campbell.
Lawrence.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just someone like that.
absolutely. And for Isabella Ashford?
Isabella Ashford, I'm thinking more someone like Naomi Watts would do quite well.
Hmm.
Or oh, what's that girl?
I could see Naomi Watts. I could see Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie.
Is that
Yes,
who you're
yes,
thinking of
Angelina
also?
Jolie.
Yeah, yeah.
Even Nicole Kidman.
Yes, yes. You need somebody who's got that strength. I mean, we're fortunate to live in an era where a lot of the female actors do have a lot of strength that they show on camera. Another one I was thinking of was Charlize Theron, often plays
Oh,
that type
yes.
of strong woman role.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So when
You've
I
written,
write, I do sort of think about who would be in if this was a movie, if I was a director, how would the scene unfold? So that's the other thing I do sort of take into account when I'm writing a section or a chapter and what the dialogue would be.
absolutely, and also picturing the actor in your mind kind of helps you
Mm,
form the dialogue, I find. Have you
absolutely.
actually worked on a draft of a screenplay for Once Is Never Enough?
Yeah, I'm in the process of doing that. Yeah.
Okay. How are you enjoying that process? Tell me how that's working.
Well, it's a collaboration, so
Mhm.
it's a different process. It's obviously a lot of toing and froing and things, emails back and forth. But it's part of the journey as a
Mhm.
writer. Do something a little bit different, get some help where you can. And what I've learned is I don't have to do everything myself. If there are good people out there willing to help, then so be it. I'm going to take use that to my advantage, not in a narcissistic way, but
Mhm.
just because that's part of my journey at the moment. So yeah.
Absolutely. Now, you are quite an international character yourself. I mean, you've roots in Dublin, you live in Perth. Tell the viewers a little bit about your journey, internationally, where you've lived, where you moved, and what's brought you to where you are now.
Okie dokie. So I was born in Dublin. So my dad's Italian. He worked in the diplomatic service, and my mom's Australian. She was a high school teacher.
Mhm.
So my parents met in Melbourne, where my sister was born many, many moons ago. And then they moved to Dublin, where I was born. And then from there, we moved to Canada, to Vancouver.
Mhm.
And then from there, we moved to Rome. And then from there, we moved to Germany. So I've done all my schooling basically in Germany and, well, most of it, and in Rome. Then I went back to Rome and started medical school there. And then halfway through medical school, my dad thought, well, I'm going to retire soon. Perhaps we're going to retire in Australia. So why don't we ship Monique off to Perth and have her finish medical school there? So that's what I did, and then basically that's how I landed in Perth. But obviously, during summer holidays, we traveled to France and other places around the world, and so I've had to learn several languages. In fact, that's also the other thing in my book. I do use a little bit of foreign language as well,
Mhm.
just to create a bit of reality to the story as well, and to the other sort of associated characters. Um, and yeah, and then I met my husband in Perth, and basically been working as a doctor, and then moving along to flying, and now writing. So my dad actually inspired me to start writing again. I used to write short stories as a youngster, and never thought that I'd publish anything. And then when my father retired from the service, he started writing just to keep the gray cells going.
Mhm.
And he writes in Italian, and he's very good. Even though I say so myself, I'm biased, but
Mhm.
he's published in Italy. So his name is Tommaso Maria Liozzi, And he's given me some of his stuff, in draft form. What do you think? So I'd be giving him ideas, and I asked him one day, well, how do you know if someone's going to buy your book? What if no one reads it? He's like, it doesn't matter. I've got a story. I've written it. I've published it. Who reads it, reads it. Who doesn't? It doesn't really matter. You have a
Right.
story to tell, write it down. And that planted the seed. And so my first book actually was inspired by him, and also my travels to Alaska on holiday. And it was actually the beautiful scenery, the mountainous area that we were in. And we took a cruise on the Inside Passage and stopped at various points. And I thought to myself, geez, this would be a great place if you were a fugitive, to hide. Who's going to find you in these mountains and amongst all this snow and the glaciers? And that's how I got the idea for my first story and started
Wonderful.
writing ideas on a napkin in the cruise ship.
That's great. That's great. If it's good enough for J.K. Rowling, it's good enough for you. And she wasn't even on a cruise ship. I think she was in a coffee shop. You've got quite an anthology already built up. You've got maybe 10 books written, 6 books written.
6, including this. So there's Foresight, and there's Hunted, that is a follow-on from Foresight. Then there's, and those two are action sort of thrillers, kind of mystery thrillers. Then there's Vestige, which is a ghost story. Then there's Diversity, which is a compilation of short stories of different genres, which I wrote during the pandemic. And then there's Facets of the Past, which is another sort of mystery story with a bit of a paranormal twist. And then there's this current one, Once Is Never Enough, Revenge Never Sleeps.
Wonderful, wonderful. I can't wait to read more. For the folks at home, I believe your website is moniquegliozzi.com, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
That's very simple. And you've got your books there that are for sale. You've got your bio there. You've got your blog and news clips there. So if they want to get entrenched in the world that you write about, that's a great starting point, I believe.
Yeah, it is. And the trailers are there as well. So
absolutely, if they want to visualize it before they pick it up. But I feel the first chapter always is what grabs the reader. And I feel the first chapter or 2 or 3, I think I kept on reading once I got reading it, are very compelling in this book because of what happens to young Larissa. I think you're kind of motivated just to continue along with her story. And then suddenly it's 10 years later or 15 years later, and she's an adult and living an adult life. So it's a wonderful book. It is called Once Is Never Enough, Revenge Never Sleeps. It is written by Dr. Monique Gliozzi. She is a terrific writer. She is a pilot. She is a psychiatrist. And I think I have to nominate her for Woman of the Year after all that. That's quite a resume, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Logan. And we'll talk again sometime soon, in a couple of weeks, about Vestige.
Looking forward to it. And it's a perfect time of year, right around Halloween, to read a ghost story. So I can't wait for that. And to the viewers at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.